Hello and welcome viewers. You're watching Perspective with your host Kriti Mishra. The Union Budget 2025, unveiled against the backdrop of global economic headwinds, aims to strike a delicate balance between ambitious growth objectives and fiscal prudence, setting the course for India's economic trajectory in the years ahead. It has made significant headway across the country, being lauded as a catalyst for stimulating consumption demand. That is a fundamental driver of India's growth story. Its emphasis on boosting domestic spending through tax relief measures and welfare programs underscores the government's commitment to fostering consumption-led growth. Yet, this focus on domestic demand does not diminish the budget's robust thrust towards export-led growth. By strategically balancing internal markets with external trade dynamics, it seeks to strengthen India's global trade footprint through initiatives aimed at reducing import dependence, diversifying export markets, and enhancing manufacturing competitiveness. And for deeper insights on this and how the budget has unleashed India's growth potential, I'm joined by two very special guests in the studio. Joining us, Mr. Shishir Priyadarshi, President of Chintan Research Foundation. Also joining us, Mr. Vinod Sharma, Chairman, CII, National Committee, ICTE Manufacturing. Welcome to Sansad TV, both of you, and thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Priyadarshi, allow me to begin the discussion with you. Despite the global headwinds, we've managed to draw the attention of countries across the world towards our growth story. A lot has been said about this budget, driving consumption, investment, disposable income, and of course, propelling economic growth. How do you see this year's budget for revitalizing India's growth story?
Thanks, Kriti. Thanks for having me here. Look, I'm going to say something which probably you've not heard or read in the newspapers so far. I think this is, as far as the finance minister is concerned, this is probably one of the most difficult budgets. And I'll tell you why. If a decision had been taken ab initio that yes, there would be a reduction in the overall revenue because of the tax relief that's going to be given, and yet the finance minister was asked that we need to maintain our economic growth at exactly the same level. So it is like asking someone that you still have to achieve the same end result, but with probably fewer resources. Yeah. And I think what we saw being presented on the 1st of this month has done an amazingly credible job in terms of balancing this both expectations and requirement. Any country's economic growth is largely led by four pillars.
Yes.
You've got the public spending, what government spends, and that's often what goes into capex. That's what we all see. There is a very large component which is the private sector. The third, again, hugely fueled by consumption, as you said when you were introducing this session. And the fourth is export.
Yes.
Very often when a budget comes out, and that's what we've been doing, you focus on the first. The government's put so much money into capex.
Yes.
And because this year the government put about the same amount as it had last year, there was this, you've heard various news items, both read and on television, questioning this, that how will this impact the growth? The third pillar, which is consumption-led growth, is going to get such a huge boost by the greater amount of money that you're going to put into the lower class and the middle class hands. I think the country is headed to a very robust economic canvas, and I think a huge credit to have taken the step to not just reduce the tax, but at the same time maintain the kind of growth figures that we would like to achieve.
Well, absolutely, and thank you so much for setting the tone and tenor of this discussion. But Mr. Vinod Sharma, we are talking about the budget and its far-reaching impact. The kind of amalgamation that we saw, consumption, expenditure, of course we've been talking about capex. Your opening thoughts on this budget, as Prime Minister said that it is going to prove to be a milestone in India's journey of development.
Thank you, Kriti, first for having me here. I see the budget as a continuing roadmap over the last few years on pushing private sector to take on a larger role and responsibility in developing the economy of this country, including employment generation, which is one of the mainstays. Last 3-4 years, the government did an excellent job of putting in more money into infrastructure, something that we definitely required. And I agree with Mr. Priyadarshi's opening comments about, we saw that the infrastructure spend has come down by about, it's not come down, it's flat.
Yeah.
We had got used to a 15-20% growth year on year. Instead of that, a 1 lakh crore, I was in a lighter vein with my colleagues at CII sharing with the infrastructure guys that actually we pinched a 1 lakh crore out of them and put it in the hands of people through the income tax relief that they've got. And I think now the onus is on us in the private sector that at the end of this fiscal year, we should be able to say that that 1 lakh crore actually did a multiple of at least 2-3x.
Yeah.
And we gave it back to the economy in terms of demand generation, in terms of building up capacity for manufacturing and services, and finally paying it back through employment and through taxes.
And also the fact that you see policy consistency in the government for the last 15 years. So there's motivation for the private sector to invest despite the long gestation period and the cost of investment?
Absolutely. So I do think that this government listens to us very carefully in the industry, not always agrees with us, but I think that dialogue continues to be very positive, and that's very, very important. Having said that, I don't want to be mistaken as saying that everything we asked for is getting done. I think there is still a lot of room to cover, and during the interview I'd like to touch upon some of those points.
Of course. But before we talk about the specifics and the other aspects, Mr. Priyadarshi, we're talking about economic growth. And who understands international dynamics better than you in this panel? Sir, look at the global headwinds, the imminent trade war, the fears of conflict in different regions. There's fear of inflation, global inflation, fuel prices. Do these factors make you jittery as far as our growth targets are concerned?
It definitely concerns me. I mean, basically, if your question was that am I worried? I am. But then we are probably not the only ones being worried. This is something which should impact a very large number of countries. You mentioned the tariffs and
Yes.
trade wars. That perhaps worries me the most. Maybe because that's something that I was most familiar with, having spent 20 plus years with the WTO. Primarily because tariffs have this very odd thing of escalating into, you hit me and I hit you back.
Yes.
And it's a never-ending story. Now, we hope better sense prevails. We hope that the covenants that countries have signed on to as part of the WTO are respected. That if there is a ceiling on the kind of tariffs that can be introduced, that is, not breached. But yes, it is a difficult time, and there are usually a large number of factors which you totally can't account for. No matter what planning you do, a 5-year plan, a year's plan, the kind of headwinds that you're talking about. But I think the way the country has been led over the last many years, and the kind of global presence that India has today, and the kind of global respect that India has today, I think headwinds will be there, but we are probably in the best position to tackle those headwinds that are there. Important thing would be to be nimble on our feet as far as the economics of geopolitics is concerned. It's a phrase I use carefully. It's the economics of geopolitics, and I think we would have to continuously strive to be 1 foot ahead of what is likely to hit us.
Absolutely. And of course, we've been the shining star in the otherwise gloomy landscape. But sir, before I take another question, Mr. Priyadarshi, I know industry has been clamoring for liquidity. Perhaps the RBI heard all the prayers that side, and it's a big boost as far as liquidity is concerned. How do you take that? So consumption and liquidity both.
It's outstanding. I mean, I'm delighted that we are having this when RBI has just announced its monetary policy. I think the 25 basis points of reduction would go a long way. Look, industry wants to be an equal partner in the growth story of the country. Industry wants to be, as they say, kandhe se kandha lada ke, desh ko aage badhana hai. There's only one thing, or if I may use this opportunity to say two things that industry really requires. And I think actually both have been addressed. The first is regulatory reforms.
Yes.
I think it is something that we can never rest on our laurels. The government needs to continuously improve it. And the setting up of a high-level committee to look at all non-financial reforms is an outstanding pronouncement in the government. My only request in that context would be you must have representatives of industry and think tanks so as to give you a feeling of what's required. And the second is liquidity.
Yes.
And if there is liquidity, if the private sector, with all controls and norms and caveats, but you need to have liquidity. And I think this reduction of the repo rate will really go a long way. Our only hope is that it actually gets translated down the words, and that RBI monitors this very carefully to ensure that what RBI has announced goes down to the industry.
You made a very important point about regulatory compliances. Mr. Sharma, I'll take that one to you. We've substantially improved our rankings as far as ease of doing business is concerned. This year's economic survey also talked about ease of doing business 2.0 by the government. I just want to understand, how has this translated on the ground, this vision of ease of doing business for the private sector, for businesses? How is that faring on the ground?
So while in the last 11 years of this government, and hence I only want to talk about that, definitely business has become easier. So there's been some ease of doing business. But if you were to ask me, is doing business easy in this country? No, it is still not easy. And why do I say that? I will be able to say that, and I think the government should be able to claim that on a day when a youngster, a girl or a boy from a village or a city, decides to take up manufacturing, for example, and I say manufacturing because obviously being a commission agent is much easier in this country than being a trader, which is much easier than being a manufacturer, than being a design manufacturer, right? So as you go down or up the value chain, whichever you look at, the impact of all the disabilities, including the regulatory impact on me, is directly proportional to how much value I'm trying to add. And hence you will see that since liberalization, many great things happen, but many manufacturing value add was eroded. They became traders or brand owners, but this deep down understanding of design, manufacturing, becoming a brand for the world, unfortunately suffered. We have to reverse that. And the day somebody decides to give up a cushy investment banking job and decides to put up a factory is the day we will agree that there is ease of doing business. Second, while the central government has done a lot of good in the last that many years, manufacturing or business actually happens in a state, in some district, in a village or in a city.
Right.
And the regulatory framework and all the inspectors that you deal with are at that level. And also a lot of manufacturing we know, for example, in terms of jobs, exports or GDP, MSMEs play an extremely important role.
That's true.
So the moment you look at a micro enterprise, it's okay for all of us in a CII forum, for example, to feel very, and compliment the government, and there has been reasons to compliment. But I think this is a good time, and Mr. Priyadarshi mentioned about this economics of geopolitics. Now is the time to say we have 3 years, and in these 3 years, we need to become truly the most globally competitive manufacturing enterprise for the world.
Absolutely.
It can happen when we begin to say whole of the government, and to that extent the announcement around National Manufacturing Mission, I think, is a shot in the arm.
Right.
My take on that, if you give me a minute, would be in the GST platform, what we've done is the center and state governments came together and pooled in their powers and said, okay, we are going to decide together. There will be no separate excise and sales tax and octroi and tolls. We put it all together into one format, GST, which is not fully done as yet. If you take electricity power, there are still a few ones remaining. Let's hope that will also be taken care of soon. But the same thing needs to happen for manufacturing. Whether it's land for industrial purposes, it's labor, and the labor codes are still pending, states have not adopted it, or it's electricity. One of the most important, there can be no manufacturing without electricity.
That's right.
And that's a monopoly. So the central government can tell me that go solar, but the state government will tell me I won't give you the transmission line for this. So I think there is still a lot that we need to handle. So to answer your question briefly, we are somewhere on that roadmap. There was also a small announcement in the budget of ranking states as per investment regions.
That's right, yeah.
And I think that's a great step again. If it's done transparently, as I hope it will be, we should have states and districts actually competing on where should I put my factory. And not like today where I have to decide, hey, is this factory for Maharashtra, or is it for exports, or is it for, to become a assembler of something? No, a factory is a factory. Its business is to, as you said, to become an enabler or to be a very important part of how the GDP of this country will grow. That's my job as private sector, and I should be allowed to.
Absolutely. Mr. Priyadarshi, let me elicit your views on that.
Sure.
Of course, we've been talking about the vision of the government, of the central government to make in India, to make India a global powerhouse as far as manufacturing is concerned. But ultimately, it is about the states. So probably the central government also realized this, and from cooperative federalism, of course, the focus is on cooperative federalism, but we're also talking about competitive federalism.
True.
Your take on that?
Look, globally, if we are to kind of be numero uno or heading in the direction, then competitiveness will be the key. You know, in the World Trade Organization in the late 90s, one of the reasons that Indian diplomats would often take, saying that why we need a little more time or a little more time for protection, was in order to make domestic industry more competitive. But very often the time was at the cost of what the consumer at that stage would pay. He would either pay more or pay more even for a less modernized or less technical good. I think we've crossed that stage. I think most Indian products today would be extremely globally competitive. But we've got to also make, but very often, very often this competitiveness is in hubs,
Yes.
Across the country.
That's right.
If we are to be a Viksit Bharat by 2047 and have the 7 trillion economy goal, then the states have to be really hubs of efficiency, of competitiveness, and of productivity.
Right.
But it's a long, you could say, a supply chain of inputs that would be required for
Yes.
that. You would need skilled talent.
Yes.
You would need a lot of factors of production, like have been mentioned. It could be land, it could be labor, it could be liquidity. But then above all, you also need the facilitative support of central government, which is very clear both in this budget and previous budgets, for the state governments to be leaders. Just one thing that the central government perhaps needs to think about a little more is the fact is, today, global trade and export is one of the biggest engines of growth. Global trade is largely in what you would call semi-finished
Yes.
goods. No one's producing a whole good.
Yes.
And therefore you need to, what's the most important thing, Kriti, for that is you need to be able to import to be able to export.
That's right.
And therefore, and again, it's visible in a number of areas, critical minerals, for instance, is one. But a large number of areas, the realization that we should help or facilitate imports, but that's a continuing, I would say, endeavor. We need to continuously reduce our duties so as to facilitate imports, which would help our exports.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Point well taken. But I'd just like to stick to manufacturing for a bit. Mr. Sharma, manufacturing has long been the Achilles heel of Indian economy. Things have improved substantially post Make in India vision. This budget, at the heart of this budget, was a national manufacturing mission as well. I just want to understand from industry perspective, what would this mission entail for the industry and for the manufacturing sector of India?
Yeah. So manufacturing is about competitiveness, global competitiveness. And we know that the elephant in the room always is our northern neighbor, China, which I think is a fantastic benchmark, to be able to produce goods, design them, produce them, make them accessible at the lowest cost possible in the world. And we have a lot to learn from them. So if you look at, I think it's the most robust supply chain in many sectors that they were able to put together, wherever the supply chain came from. So the first thing I would say is that we need to realize that we can't shift global supply chains to India as we would like. We can integrate into these global supply chains. And so, as you very rightly pointed out, semi-finished goods. So if I'm going to be somebody who's going to participate in that global value chain, the first thing that my customer or a bunch of customers is looking at is reliability.
Yes.
From a policy perspective, on one day I cannot say my government will not allow me to export this anymore. That's not the way it works. The second thing, of course, competitiveness is about cost. And there are costs that are outside my factory. Like I mentioned, the cost of land, labor, electricity, logistics, liquidity, the cost of money itself, which is not really in the control of an enterprise. And then there is a lot that I can do within the four walls of my factory. There again, there is a lot of scope. So today, if you look at Industry 4.0, if you look at reskilling, use of machine learning, AI tools, there is a lot that we can also do within the company.
Yeah.
And I think we need to do, there is equal work need to be done on both sides. We hope that the National Manufacturing Mission will begin to answer this. So in the first part I did talk about, and you asked me about ease of doing business.
Yes.
I think equally important is cost of doing business.
That's right. Yeah.
So if there is a government, let's say in China, where they decide that industrial land will be given to you on lease, and hence the per square meter cost of your manufacturing comes down dramatically. However, in India, because we are an open market, it is seen as my insurance for the next generation as land. And so the richest man holds on to the largest amount of industrial land, and that's what escalates. Then obviously our manufacturing will suffer there. Similarly on logistics, I think we need to have an index at the end of it. I think in the mission should be that. What is today the import cost per kilogram from something coming from overseas? I can tell you today that I buy some wire every month in container loads from Shaoxing, a province in China. From there to a container coming to the port at JNPT, this cost me 4 rupees a kilo. From JNPT port to my factory in Noida, it cost me 14 rupees a kilo. 2.5 times more. And also the predictability, things are improving. But like I said, the global marketplace is a very tough one. By telling my customers that I'm improving, I'm not going to get more orders. Right. It's only the day that I meet the global benchmark on quality, on technology, and on price that I will begin to win market shares. The last bit on that is, I think, for some reason, and I say that with some responsibility, there are many elements of governance and industry and parts of our supply chain that are still misaligned. While we all pretend to be working towards a national goal, Viksit Bharat, I think many of our rules and regulations still make us work in very different. So a customs, and the way a customs officer is probably his KRAs and what he's driven with, can delay consignments, delaying my sort of, being able to deliver stuff to my own customers at point of time. And these are all well-meaning, educated officers of the government. But unfortunately, I don't know whether it's the rule book or whether it's the chair they sit on. If I'm competing with somebody where somebody else is working as a full team, versus I'm now in a team where we are probably still looking at each other with suspicion, I think that's also a gap that needs to be fulfilled. And I have reasons to believe that the National Manufacturing Mission can actually aim to set this whole thing right.
Well, of course, there's a lot of focus on reducing the logistics cost as well. We have PM Gati Shakti, but of course, we'll keep talking about that. But Mr. Priyadarshi talking about another very important aspect, which is energy security and clean energy climate change. Of course, we've been talking about it since a very long time. The budget also focused on energy transition. It focused on the green hydrogen mission as well as the EVs. Sir, how do you see this budget in furthering India's goal towards green economy?
In one word, Kriti, I'd say excellent. We all, Vinod, me, others, you listen to the FM speech and then you read the budget document. A lot of things can't be said in the FM speech, but they are there in the budget document. And I think there is such an overall comprehensive and consolidated thrust on green and clean energy.
Yes.
You've got a thrust on the solar production, you've got a thrust on wind, you've got a thrust importantly on batteries, you've got a thrust very, very importantly on storage, because a lot of these will not simply be there. There's also a big fillip, I would say, for manufacturing of this in India, especially in the MSME sector. So we've got a big thrust there. Now, there's also a thrust on nuclear.
Yes.
This whole thought about the small modular reactor. Now that's also very positive. Obviously, nuclear doesn't fall in the category of green and clean, but it definitely falls within the category of energy security. Again, a small thing. I think, the private sector, in my view, especially once you amend the Atomic Energy Act and the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damages Act, I think the private sector can do so much more. And at the moment, I think these are steps, if within the overall ambit of privatization. I think that's another way. I know you started about green and clean energy, but I'm really saying is that if you look at clean energy production, who's leading the way? It's the private sector.
That's right.
Where do you have a solar power plant as large as Khavda?
Yes.
It surprised me. It's such a stunning revelation that Khavda is 5 times the size of Paris.
Yeah.
The private sector has done
Yeah.
it. Now, I think the private sector could play an equally important role in the gradual development of nuclear, these small nuclear modular reactors. But that combined with the thrust on wind energy, on solar energy, the hybrid energy, I think the government's got its sights well in mind to ensure that we meet our target of zero net emission without compromising the target of ensuring that every person has energy security, energy affordability, and yet we reach the Viksit Bharat goal by 2047.
Of course, Mr. Sharma, the budget also talked about partnering with the private sector as far as power is concerned. In fact, shipbuilding also.
That's right, yeah. No, absolutely. So I'd want to sort of expand a little bit on not just green and clean, but the whole definition of ESG.
Yes.
And I think the moment you take, of course, environment, social and governance, our responsibility and governance into, I think India has this unique chance that we talked about cost competitiveness a little earlier, but actually competitiveness from a value perspective will include somebody whose costs are reasonable, but also has a very high performance rating on ESG. And I think their Indian private sector can be the number one.
Yeah.
So if you put this whole thing together, why do I say that? Our energy consumption per capita is one of the lowest in the world today. So we are starting off from a completely different standpoint. We generally in our culture have environment consciousness. People still will use a handkerchief and not a tissue paper.
Yes.
There might be a very small thing. So, what Honorable Prime Minister keeps talking about, life.
Yes.
So it's embedded in our own way of thinking. Our prayers are about the environment, about Prakriti, etc. So if we were to combine this with our own manufacturing mission, I think our adaptability as enterprises and institutions to create a more ESG compliant manufacturing house for the world, our chances are very high. And I think I find that very exciting. Number two, again, what it will require is, for example, innovative thinking, and I hope think tanks like yours will work in that. Technology transfer at scale.
Yes.
So pick up a good technology and say this is available to all micro enterprises, all. LED, for example, when Mr. Piyush Goyal was the power minister, was a fantastic example where we were able to bring down the price of LEDs, aggregated buying and distribution through the country to bring down the price. Same thing can happen to air conditioners tomorrow because that's becoming a necessity. We can go on, but so I think the aggregation of demand and technology, and then allowing Indian enterprises to sort of run with it, can get us not just for India, but become large exporters of those technologies.
That's true. Now the clock only allows me to take the closing comments from both my panelists. Mr. Priyadarshi, Viksit Bharat by the year 2047, the growth rate has to touch 8%. The growth drivers and challenges according to you.
Look, because we have less time, let me focus on the challenges. One thing you've got to be prepared is that no matter what is said publicly, and I'm much more of a global person, I'm only becoming a national person now, no matter what is said publicly, be completely assured that not everyone is happy with the kind of growth India is showing. And therefore, we've got to be prepared for any kind of attack. It could be economic, it could be misinformation, it could be questioning some of our policies, practices, social norms, cultures. It's got to be across all that front. But the second very, very important thing is, and I think the present government acknowledges it and takes it in that direction, is the huge reach and role that the private sector can play.
That's right.
And I think the minute we harness that in every possible way, and the minute we plan ahead in a consolidated way, we should now stop looking or thinking of projects in isolation. We always look at airports. Yes. But as an example, and I was just hearing this from someone, so I'm quoting it, we've had the Kumbh now.
Yes.
When's the next Kumbh? I'm told it's in Ujjain in 2028.
So.
Why not identify that whole region as an airport, as a commercial hub, as a real estate, as a transport hub? We look at such kinds of things as a tourism hub. And if we do this together, then in spite of all the headwinds, we are headed in a phenomenally great direction.
Absolutely. Mr. Sharma.
Yeah. In our own business, we always say that, of course, the dharma is profit.
Yes.
But that P actually can only be enabled by 4 other Ps. The purpose. Is there a unified purpose? I think we are very lucky in this country. We have a great leader. And this government has very clearly, never before have I heard this articulation of what a Viksit Bharat would be.
That's
What
right.
should be the per capita GDP. So we have a roadmap, not for 3 or 5 years, but up to 47. So there is a unified purpose. There are people, I mean, the talent in this country is unbelievable. Of course, we need some skilling and reskilling and repurposing some people there. We have the passion that I think the belief today in both the private sector and the government across the country has, in spite of all the headwinds we see, we still say, hey, we are much better off than anybody else.
That's right.
And we are willing to get into this challenge and create something out of it. So the passion is great. The one that's missing and needs to work, I think, is the process. Because while you can have all this, the processes between how we deal with each other, whether we trust or mistrust, how much do I, make your job tougher, ease of doing business, cost of doing business. If you get the processes right, I think we will win. And I'm 100% sure we will get there.
Absolutely. On that sanguine note, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Sharma and Mr. Priyadarshi.
Thank you
so much for
having
sharing
us.
your
Thank
perspective with us. Well, viewers, that's all we had for you in this edition. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to Sansad TV. Goodbye for now from my side.
To watch more programs of Sansad TV, subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to like and share them.